You really expect us to babysit while Adele is in town? Don't be ridiculous. We already bought the tickets. Why can't you just figure things out yourself for once? That was my mother's voice, calm but cutting, dripping with a kind of cruelty that felt sharper than a knife. She didn't even hesitate. She didn't care that I was hours away from surgery, hooked up to 4 lines, clutching my swollen belly with stitches from the emergency C-section still fresh, begging for help. I remember staring at my phone screen, her words replaying in my head like a broken record. You're such a problem. Always an inconvenience. Hi everyone. My name is Ilara Quinn, and I was 29 when I learned that blood ties can strangle harder than chains. I had twin baby boys, barely a few months old, 2 fragile lives that needed rocking arms and warm bottles. My only request was simple: watch them for one night while I was wheeled into critical surgery. But instead of compassion, my parents and brother gave me abandonment dressed up as excuses. I lay there in the hospital bed, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the antiseptic air burning my nostrils. The nurse's shoes squeaked against the linoleum as she whispered, "Do you have someone to care for the babies while you're in recovery?" And my throat closed up because the answer was no. I wanted to scream. To cry. To demand why love had to be conditional, why I had to pay in gratitude and silence just to be worthy of their presence. But all I did was press my lips together until the taste of iron filled my mouth. The Adele concert. The Adele concert. That's what mattered more than me bleeding on a table. That's what mattered more than my children breathing in the night. In that moment, something inside me crystallized. Cold. Sharp. Unbreakable. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I found a sitter. A stranger who showed more kindness in a 2-minute phone call than my family had shown in a lifetime. She rocked my boys while I was stitched back together, while my parents danced under stage lights and my brother filmed it all for Instagram stories. 3 weeks later, when the surgical wounds had barely healed and silence had settled into my house like an unwelcome ghost, there was a knock on the door. A knock that promised everything was about to change. The knock came again, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the quiet of my living room. My twins stirred in their bassinets, tiny fists clenching in their sleep. For a moment, I froze, my heart beating in my throat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I padded softly to the door, stitches tugging with every step, and peeked through the peephole. It was my mother. Her face looked pale, worn, and strangely desperate. Behind her stood my brother, arms crossed, shifting from foot to foot as if the concrete burned beneath his sneakers. I opened the door just enough for my voice to slip through. "What do you want?" "Ilara, we need to talk," my mother said, her tone trembling now, so different from that icy dismissal weeks ago. It's urgent." I stared at them, remembering the fluorescent lights, the antiseptic air, the way she told me I was nothing but a problem. The image seared into me. "You left me when I needed you most," I said quietly, my voice as steady as I could make it. "Now you're here? Why?" My brother exhaled, rubbing his temple. "It's Dad. He had a situation. We need your help." The absurdity nearly made me laugh. They hadn't been there when I was bleeding, when I thought I might not survive. Yet here they were, on my porch, demanding. Always demanding. "Help." I repeated, letting the word hang between us like smoke. "Yes," my mother pressed, her eyes flicking toward the babies inside. "You've always been resourceful. We can't handle this alone." And there it was again, that entitlement, the belief that I existed only to clean their messes, to be the invisible scaffolding propping up their world. I leaned against the doorframe, my body aching but my resolve solid as stone. "You made your choice the night of that concert. Remember?" Their silence told me they did. I didn't close the door, not yet. Something inside me wanted to see just how far their desperation would go. Because sometimes revenge doesn't start with slamming doors. Sometimes it starts with leaving them open, just wide enough to watch them squirm. My mother's hands fidgeted, clutching her purse strap so tightly the leather creaked. My brother wouldn't meet my eyes, his jaw working like he was chewing rocks. Finally, she spoke. "Your father, he was scammed. The money, Ilara. All of it, gone." The words hung in the air like shattered glass. I blinked, stunned not by the confession, but by the irony. 4 years, my father had funded my brother's whims, business ventures that never lasted, trips that bled into indulgence. He'd sneered at me for choosing stability, for working quietly, for not being ambitious enough. And now? Their empire of pride had toppled. I folded my arms, pressing against the ache in my chest. And this concerns me because... My brother finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were sharp, tinged with humiliation. Because you have savings. You've always been good with money. We need you to cover things until we recover. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. My babies stirred at the sound, their small breaths reminding me of the nights I had cried silently, rocking them alone. And now, the very people who left me stranded on an operating table wanted my help. You mean you want me to rescue you? I said softly. After you chose a concert over my children's safety. My mother flinched. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I cut her off. For a moment, there was only silence. Outside, a car drove past, headlights flashing across their faces, revealing the lines of panic etched into their skin. I thought of the sitter's gentle smile, her hands cradling my son's. A stranger who had shown up when family had not. I thought of how my stitches burned as I signed the first check to pay her, money that had once gone to my parents without question. Now they wanted more. Always more. I stepped back, the door still open, but my voice was steel. Tell me everything. Every detail of how you lost it all. Because if they wanted my help, they would have to bleed the truth first. My mother's voice cracked as she began. Your father invested, it was supposed to be safe. A friend introduced him to this group, promised insane returns. They even had offices, legal documents, everything. I could already see where this was going. My father, proud and greedy, always wanted the quick win, the grand victory. How much? I asked, my voice flat. My brother shifted uncomfortably. 150,000. Everything Dad had saved. Even some of my accounts. The number hit me like a punch. That was more than what he had ever offered me in all my life combined. More than he had deemed me worthy of when I begged for help with the twins' medical bills. Yet he had handed it over to strangers without blinking. I felt my jaw tighten. So he gave con men everything while calling me a burden. That's rich. My mother winced at the venom in my tone. Ilara, please, we didn't know it was a scam until the bank called. The accounts are frozen, the investigators say it's international. We can't even pay the mortgage. We could lose the house. And? I asked, tilting my head. My brother's temper snapped. And you need to stop acting like some saint. You've always had it easy, saving, hiding money, being selfish. You think you're better than us. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Easy? Sleepless nights with crying infants while stitches tore open. Easy? Working from my bed just to keep food on the table. Easy? Watching my family run off to concerts while I bled alone. I stepped closer, my voice low but sharp. No, Alex. I don't think I'm better. I just stopped letting you drain me dry. They both stared at me then, silent, waiting for a shred of mercy I wasn't sure I had left. And in that silence, I realized something. This wasn't just their downfall. It was my turning point. For the first time in years, I held the power, and they knew it. I closed the door halfway, letting their panic cling to the threshold. Come back tomorrow, I said. And bring proof. The next evening, just after I laid the twins down, headlights swept across my front window. A car door slammed. Then another. The knock followed, heavier this time, impatient. When I opened the door, my brother shoved a folder into my hands. Here. The proof you wanted. I carried it to the kitchen table, their footsteps trailing me like shadows. My mother clutched her coat tightly, eyes darting toward the bassinets where my babies slept. She didn't dare speak. I opened the folder. Pages upon pages of contracts, glossy brochures, even photos of lavish offices with smiling investors. But then I saw it, my brother's signature, bold and reckless, on the line beneath my father's. And worse, loan applications, 3 of them, with my name typed neatly on the guarantor line. Forged. The air left my lungs. You forged my name. My brother flinched. It was just paperwork, no one was supposed to get hurt. We thought. You thought, I hissed, slamming the folder shut. You could gamble with my life, my credit, my children's future. Without me knowing. My mother's voice cracked. We didn't know he would do that. But her words fell flat. She had always known. She had always turned away when it was convenient. I rose slowly, the chair scraping against the tile, the sound sharp as a blade. So while I was on an operating table, fighting for breath, you weren't just at a concert. You were also dragging my name into your lies. Neither of them spoke. My brother's shoulders slumped, his arrogance bleeding out into shame. I looked at them, these people who had called me an inconvenience, a problem, a burden. And now they needed me to fix the mess they had built on my stolen name. For a brief moment, I saw it, the house they might lose, the fee etched into my mother's face, the hollow look in my brother's eyes. But then I thought of my twins, innocent and fragile, who deserved better than this cycle of betrayal. I placed the folder back in his hands. Leave, I said coldly. Before I call the police. They didn't leave quietly. My brother's face twisted with frustration. You think you can just shut the door on us? On family? His voice rose, and I instinctively glanced toward the bassinets. My boys stirred, and a warning heat surged through me. Lower your voice, I said sharply. But he didn't. He stepped closer, slamming the folder back onto my table. If you don't help, Ilara, they'll come after you too. Those loans, they've got your name. Do you understand? You'll go down with us. The threat hung heavy in the room, like poison gas. My mother gasped softly, Alex, stop. But I could see in her eyes she was terrified of the truth in his words. I held his stare, even as my heart hammered. You forged my name. If I go down, you're dragged with me. And don't think for a second I'll protect you this time. His jaw clenched, but his bravado faltered. My mother stepped in then, voice breaking. Ilara, please. If not for us, for your father. He's sick with worry. This will kill him. A bitter laugh escaped me. You mean it'll kill his pride? He cared more for money than for his daughter bleeding in a hospital bed. Silence swallowed the room. For a moment, I considered slamming the door in their faces for good. But another part of me, a colder part, realized this wasn't over. They were desperate, cornered animals, and cornered animals bite. I leaned forward, voice low. You want me involved? Fine. But not on your terms. From now on, I control the narrative. Every document, every call, every word, you run it through me. And if you lie once more, I'll burn you down with the truth. My brother's eyes flickered with both fear and rage. My mother nodded, too quickly, relief washing over her. But inside, I wasn't agreeing to help. I was laying the trap. Because if they wanted me tangled in this mess, I would make sure they regretted ever dragging me into it. They left that night with promises like paper boats, fragile, collapsing the moment the river tasted salt. I watched them go, the porch light carving their shadows long and thin across my floor. The twins slept on, oblivious to the storm we were making of our lives. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, the folder from earlier pushed aside like an accusation. I mapped the lie line by line, forged guarantor forms, loan receipts, notarized stamps that smelled of someone else's hand. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but with a deliberate eagerness. I was ready to turn their world inside out. Step 1 was small and surgical. I called the bank, not to beg, but to learn. I listened to protocol and recording IDs, wrote down names, logged times. I learned the scam's architecture, shell companies, offshore accounts, a chain that led to a single broker who loved fast money and faster lies. Step 2 was public pressure. I made calculated social posts, neutral, factual, nothing libelous, about fraud prevention and consumer rights in our city, tagging local community groups. I watched their messages ripple through the neighborhood where my parents' reputation lived like a fragile vase. People began to whisper. Concern turned toward suspicion. Step 3 targeted vulnerability. I contacted the investigator on file and requested copies of the bank's notice to my parents. I asked questions that made the investigator uncomfortable and curious. He agreed to meet, not because he trusted me, but because my name, now tied to forged documents, made the whole thing messy and interesting. Messy was good. Messy exposed more than neat silence ever could. Meanwhile, I kept the baby's days steady. Bottles, naps, lullabies. I hired the sitter again for evenings and rehearsed calm for naptime phone calls. In the background, I threaded breadcrumbs straight to the broker, emails, polite requests for receipts, a courteous demand for proof. Every polite message was a mirror held up to their faces. My brother called twice. I let it ring. My mother sent a text, short and frantic. I didn't answer. I wanted them to feel the slow erosion of certainty, the same erosion they'd given me when they chose stage lights over stitches. At midnight, there was a knock. Not on my door this time, but the kind that ripples across the internet. A forwarded message, a screenshot, a comment that turned into a thread. Their neighbors were asking questions. The house that had looked impenetrable all these years had a crack. And from that crack, everything began to fall. The crack widened quickly. What began as whispers online grew into shouts in the daylight. Neighbors no longer waved at my parents in the driveway. Old friends stopped answering their calls. My father's name, once untouchable in local circles, was now paid with words like fraud, reckless, and liar. I hadn't even needed to push hard. Just a nudge, a seed of truth, and their carefully built facade collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance. 3 nights later, I received a call from the investigator. We've traced the documents. The forged guarantor signatures. You're cleared, Ms. Quinn. We'll be pursuing the parties responsible. His tone carried sympathy. And a subtle judgment, the kind you save for families who eat their own. I hung up and stared at my sleeping sons. For the first time in months, I breathed without the ache of betrayal pressing on my ribs. The next morning, they came again. My mother, mascara smudged, my brother pale as parchment. My father too weak to walk, waiting in the car like a ghost. Ilara, please, my mother whispered at the door. We've lost everything. We don't know where else to go. I studied her face, the same lips that had once called me an inconvenience, the same hands that waved me away for a concert. And in that moment, I realized forgiveness wasn't required for closure. I opened the door only a fraction, enough for my voice to slip through. Calm. Final. You had tickets when I had stitches. You had laughter when I had silence. Now, I have peace. And you have consequences. Her eyes glistened, but I didn't waver. I closed the door slowly, softly, without rage or cruelty, just certainty. Behind it, my boys stirred, their tiny breaths filling the room with a future untouched by my family's rot. I pressed my hand to the wood, feeling the separation between past and present, and whispered to myself, this chapter is finished. The house was quiet again. Quiet, but not empty. Because for the first time, I wasn't alone.